So when you hear the term loss and damage, what comes to mind? Maybe an insurance form, right? But for millions of people in the Caribbean, it is not some abstract concept. Nope. For over 30 years, it's been their real and often devastating reality. So let's really get into what that means. And this is what it actually looks like. We're not talking about data on a spreadsheet here. We're talking about homes just shattered, communities underwater, lives completely turned upside down. This is the stark reality that for the Caribbean, climate change isn't some far-off threat. It's happening right now, and it's actively wiping out decades of progress.
Okay, so to really wrap our heads around this, we need to get specific. What are we actually talking about when we use the term loss and damage? Well, it turns out it's kind of like a coin with two very different sides.
All right, here's the textbook definition. Think of it this way. Loss and damage is what happens when the seawalls you built just aren't high enough anymore. It's the damage that hits after you've tried everything to adapt or when there's just nothing left you can do. It's the stuff that's unavoidable, and a lot of the time it's irreversible. It's the bill coming due for a warming planet. And this is a really important distinction to make. On one side, you've got economic loss. This is the stuff you can put a price on, right? A busted up airport, crops that are ruined, hotels with no tourists. But then there's the non-economic loss. And seriously, how do you put a price tag on a sacred cultural site that's just gone? Or a whole species that's disappeared forever? Or even just that feeling of being safe in your own home? You just can't. And that's such a massive and honestly often ignored part of this whole story. All right, let's zoom in on that economic side for a second. Because even if we only look at the stuff with a price tag, the numbers are just, well, they're mind-blowing. The numbers we're about to look at aren't just big. In a lot of cases, they're bigger than a nation's entire yearly economic output. Just try to imagine that. A single storm comes through and wipes out more value than your entire country created in a whole year. $34 billion. That was the price tag for the Bahamas from just one event, Hurricane Dorian, back in 2019. For an economy that size, that scale of destruction is just, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. And believe me, this was not a one-off thing. Yeah, this is a pattern. Take a look at Grenada. Back in 2004, Hurricane Ivan slammed the island. The cost? $900 million. That figure was more than double the country's entire GDP. It just keeps happening. But this next one, wow. This might be the most staggering number of them all. 226%. In 2017, Hurricane Maria caused damage to Dominica that was worth more than twice its entire yearly economy. Just let that sink in for a second. More than double. This isn't a setback. This is like hitting a reset button that sends you back decades, all from one storm. And as absolutely wild as those numbers are, they're not even the full story, not even close. What the research shows is that the official reports, they're really just the tip of the iceberg.
So what gets counted and what gets missed? Well, the official numbers are pretty good at adding up the immediate damage from a massive hurricane. What they're not so good at counting are those slow onset events. You know, the disasters that creep up on you. We're talking about sea levels rising and ruining farmland, coral reefs bleaching and the fish disappearing, or those huge waves of sargassum seaweed that smother beaches and kill tourism. These things add up. Their economic cost is huge, but they don't always grab the headlines.
And this map really shows you just how complex it all is. I mean, just look at all that red. We tend to focus on the hurricanes, right? But these countries are juggling drought, storm surges, insane heat, and floods, often all at the same time. Each one has a cost, and they all pile on top of each other, creating this chain reaction of risk that is just so difficult to handle. And that brings us right back to that other side of the coin, the non-economic losses. The stuff that never shows up on a balance sheet, but you could argue is way more profound. I mean, we're talking about the loss of cultural heritage, of traditional knowledge, entire communities having to pack up and move, the long-term effects on people's health. It's the very fabric of society getting torn apart. So when you add all of this up, the billions of dollars, the unseen damage, the cultural loss, it's no surprise that the conversation has changed. This isn't just a disaster recovery problem anymore. Now it's a question of justice. And this quote from the source material really gets to the heart of it. The argument from Caribbean nations is pretty simple. We didn't cause this crisis, so why should we have to bear the costs alone? They're framing it as an issue of climate justice, and they're saying it requires international support, not just national responsibility. And here is the number that backs up their entire argument: 0.5%. That's it. That is the total contribution of all small island developing states to all the historical emissions that caused climate change in the first place. A tiny, tiny fraction. And for that, they are facing a massive and sometimes even existential threat. This chart just makes that disparity impossible to ignore. It's looking at disaster damages as a chunk of a country's GDP. The worldwide average, 21%. For the Caribbean, 66%. That's more than 3 times higher. The economic hit they're taking is just on a completely different level. Okay, so given this reality, where do we go from here? Well, the good news is the report doesn't just lay out the problem. It actually offers up a pretty clear 5-step plan for the path forward. And if you look at these steps, the big themes are coordination and, transparency. Step 1 is basically getting everyone on the same page, creating a standard way to report all this damage. Then you can create national plans, figure out exactly how much money is needed, report that number officially through the UN, and finally track all the climate-related spending to make sure it's all above board. It's a really practical plan to tackle what is, at its core, an issue of justice. Which really leaves us with this one big question. For the last 30 years, the story of climate change in the Caribbean has been a story of loss, just one hit after another. But now, with a clear plan on the table and a growing call for justice, can they turn that story around? Can the next 30 years be about resilience instead? The roadmap is there, but man, the journey is really just beginning.